Hello, this is Claudia, and for the next hour I'll be reading from the August 19th issue of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Tariffs on hold as Trump claims deal with Canada is near. Prime Minister Mark Carney of Canada was less definitive about what the intense talks produced, saying important work remained. Canada got a 3-day reprieve on damaging new American tariffs against billions of dollars worth of goods, with President Trump claiming that a deal was close, but Prime Minister Mark Carney saying only that substantial progress had been made. Mr. Trump announced the delay on imposing 50% tariffs in a social media post on Tuesday night, roughly 90 minutes before the midnight deadline. The White House issued a proclamation saying Canada had agreed to make certain trade concessions, and the extra days were needed to finalize those provisions. I had paused the 50% tariffs against Canada that were scheduled to kick in tomorrow morning for a 3-day period based on the fact that Canada and the U.S., subject to the finalization of documents, have a deal, Mr. Trump said. I had paused the 50% tariffs against Canada that were scheduled to kick in tomorrow morning for a 3-day period based on the fact that Canada and the U.S. subject to the finalization. Mr. Trump had previously announced deals with other countries only to have them fall through, including a recent series of elapsed agreements with Iran. In a brief statement, Mr. Carney was less definitive about what the talks had produced. Over the last number of weeks, Canada has engaged in intensive discussions with the United States to address outstanding trade issues, he said. Substantial progress has been made, although there is important work still to be done. Reflecting his pivot away from Canada's economic dependence on the United States, Mr. Carney added, Canada remains focused on building a stronger, more independent, and more competitive economy at home. In a social media post, the Office of the United States Trade Representative, which was carrying out the negotiations, said the deal would include comprehensive market access for all American goods, economic security commitments, digital trade alignment, and other provisions that would protect the U.S. market. Entering the negotiations, Mr. Carney said that he was attempting to avert the new tariffs, which, if put in place, would affect hundreds of products that account, by the Trump administration's estimates, for $20 billion in Canadian exports. But Mr. Carney said last month that our objective is not to reach a deal whatever it costs with the United States, but he has also made it clear that Canada would make any agreement contingent on eliminating or reducing tariffs of up to 50% on Canadian steel, aluminum, and autos introduced last year. Canada also is seeking relief on tariffs against Canadian lumber that date back decades and were increased by Mr. Trump. The United States, in turn, was looking for an end to the boycotts of American wine and spirits in some provincial alcohol distribution systems that allowed Mr. Trump's earlier tariffs. It was also seeking an end to Canada's retaliatory tariffs against imports of American automobiles and changes to how some American dairy products are allowed to enter Canada's largely closed market. In the presidential proclamation, Mr. Trump claimed that Canada had expressed a commitment to address all those issues. Mr. Trump linked the looming agreement to the Keystone XL, a major pipeline project that would have transported oil from Canada to the United States of Gulf Coast, but was scrapped by the Biden administration in 2021. The project had been approved during the first Trump administration. The great Keystone Pipeline, long ago killed by Sleepy Joe Biden, may be awoken from the grave, Mr. Trump added on his social media post. Despite being considered largely dead for 5 years, speculation that a new project closely mirroring Keystone could return grew this year as a U.S. company filed an application in Montana to build a pipeline bringing in Canadian oil. Mr. Carney had brought up the possibility of resurrecting the project with Mr. Trump during a White House visit last year. The trade talks have been a prelude to a larger negotiation over the future of the North American Trade Agreement. The United States and Mexico have carried out several rounds of talks over the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, which Mr. Trump signed in his first term, but has since started to criticize. For U.S. officials, the threat of tariffs have been a way to amass negotiating leverage over the Canadian government while also forcing Canada to act on trade issues they deem unfair. While Mr. Carney has pulled some of Canada's trade retaliation and made other concessions to the United States, he has seemed far less willing to discuss giving anything more to the United States since Mr. Trump announced the sweeping 50% tariffs in July. Since his return to office, Mr. Trump has started a trade war with Canada that has shredded free trade agreements going back to 1989 while stoking anger and fear among Canadians. In Canada, frustrations have been expressed in various ways, including a drastic decline in vacation travel by Canadians to the United States. In a poll by Abacus Data released on Monday, 74% of respondents said that American trade actions had already affected their households, with 30% describing the effects as major. While the Supreme Court struck down most of Mr. Trump's tariffs in February, the steel, aluminum, and auto tariffs against Canada were brought under another law that was not covered by that decision. The tariffs now on hold were to be made under another law, an untested trade provision from 1930. A conversation between Mr. Trump and Mr. Carney resumed trade talks in late July. The United States broke off negotiations last fall on steel, aluminum, and autos after the province of Ontario placed television ads in the United States that featured clips of President Ronald Reagan, who signed the 1989 Free Trade Agreement with Canada, warning about the dangers of tariffs. News of the three-day reprieve brought some relief in Canada, but industry leaders highlighted that the prolonged uncertainty was damaging. Let's be clear, the tariff delay provides relief on both sides of the border, Candice Lang, who leads the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, said in a statement. Businesses may not be closing up shop with this news, but an extension doesn't bring the certainty that a signed interim deal would, she added. In the United States, the chance of a breakthrough on some Canadian measures were eagerly anticipated. In a statement, Chris Swanger, the president of the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States, said he appreciated Mr. Trump's effort to restore access for American spirits after more than a year and a half of sales bans. These provincial bans have caused exports of American spirits to drop by more than 70%, leaving American distillers caught in the middle of a broader trade dispute. Queen Camilla says it was difficult to keep Charles's sick cancer a secret. I was just longing to let it out, Camilla said in a rare public comments about the King's 2024 diagnosis, which was not immediately revealed, but obviously I couldn't. In a video released on Wednesday, Queen Camilla made rare public comments about King Charles III's cancer, talking about how difficult his diagnosis had been for her, especially in the days before Buckingham Palace made the news public. I was just longing to let it out, Camilla said in the video, which was released by the British royal family and by a leading UK cancer charity, Maggie's, of which Camilla is the president. But obviously I couldn't, she added. Camilla was reflecting on a 2024 visit with cancer patients and their families, which she made shortly after Charles's cancer was diagnosed, but before the palace had made an official announcement. The Queen, who has been involved with Maggie's for years, had often made such visits, but this time was different, she said. She was there not just as a figurehead, but as another worried spouse. I was almost questioning them, Camilla said. She held back, she said, because she didn't want to pry too deeply. With Charles's condition still a secret, she could not tell the others that they were all experiencing the fear and uncertainty of a cancer diagnosis. Holding back was quite difficult, she said in the video, which was released to mark the charity's 30th anniversary. I almost said something, she added, but I felt that it wasn't time. It is rare for members of the royal family to speak publicly about their private lives. Since 2024, they have dealt not just with Charles's diagnosis, but with that of Catherine, the Princess of Wales, who announced weeks later that she too was battling cancer. Neither royal has disclosed what type of cancer they have. Both have since returned to public life and have used their diagnosis to advocate for cancer patients and speak about the emotional challenges of facing the disease. In December, when Charles told the British public that he was doing well and could scale back his treatment, he said it was a testimony to the remarkable advances that have been made in cancer care in recent years. ICE bars its workers from wearing Meta's smart glasses on the job. The agency joins a growing number of workplaces and groups to ban Meta's devices which have spurred privacy concerns. Immigration and Customs Enforcement has prohibited its employees from wearing Meta smart glasses, the latest workplace to ban the devices out of privacy concerns. In a memo about the policy on Tuesday, ICE said it considered the glasses, which can discreetly record video and audio, as a body-worn camera. As a result, the use of Meta glasses or similar devices could unintentionally capture, record, or transmit sensitive information, potentially compromising privacy and legal protections, David Venturella, the agency's acting director, wrote in the memo. Under the policy, ICE said employees are barred from wearing the Meta glasses in the federal workspace. The policy applies to all employees, not just its law enforcement officials, the agency said. Personally owned body-worn cameras and unauthorized recording are prohibited, as they always have been, a spokesman for the Department of Homeland Security said in a statement. Meta declined to comment. ICE joins a growing number of organizations and workplaces to ban Meta smart glasses, which have become one of the company's best-selling hardware products, even as they have raised privacy and surveillance concerns. Meta debuted the smart glasses in 2021 and has released versions in partnership with companies like Ray-Ban and Oakley. The glasses feature a small camera above the eye frame that can record video and audio, and they emit a blinking white light while recording. New versions have an artificial intelligence assistant that can respond to voice commands and project a tiny screen visible to the wearer in the corner of the eye frame. Last month, New York became the first state to ban Meta's smart glasses in its court buildings to ensure that no one can be recorded. Some stores and restaurants have also forbidden the devices, which have spawned an industry of content creators who film inside businesses, often without permission. ICE does not have a partnership with Meta, but its agents have come under fire in the last year for wearing the company's smart glasses to protests and during immigration raids. ICE initially told employees the glasses were banned in June, according to an internal email obtained by the New York Times. In the Department of Homeland Security's budget proposal in April, the agency requested $7.5 million to develop its own smart glasses prototype to help with immigration enforcement, including glasses that can enable biometric identification of illegal aliens. The Times previously reported that Meta was working on adding facial recognition features to its smart glasses. The company has not made those features available. Privacy groups have raised concerns about facial recognition. In April, the American Civil Liberties Union wrote a letter signed by 77 organizations asking that Meta not include facial recognition in its glasses out of privacy and civil liberty concerns. Facial recognition technology built into inconspicuous consumer eyewear represents a serious threat to privacy and civil liberties for every member of our society, the organization wrote. Our concerns reflect the fundamental danger of the technology itself. The glasses have become a focal point of Meta's AI ambitions. Mark Zuckerberg, the company's chief executive, has called smart glasses the ideal form of superintelligence, a powerful AI that the company is investing hundreds of billions to develop. Meta, which owns Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, has heavily marketed new versions of its smart glasses, including with celebrities like Kylie Jenner and athletes who played in the World Cup. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Boyfriend who abused Hayden Panettiere had returned to her life. Despite the actress's efforts to move on from a turbulent relationship with Brian Hickerson, they were together when she went into cardiac arrest and died. A few months before her death on Sunday, Hayden Panettiere was making the rounds to promote her new memoir, where she wrote about the traumas she had faced in her life, including efforts to disentangle herself from a toxic and abusive boyfriend. She described herself as finally free of him. Abusers, they weave themselves like weeds into your life, she said on a podcast in May. That boyfriend, Brian Hickerson, made his own media appearance the next day to express his regret for the abuse. Very little is publicly known about the circumstances of Miss Panettiere's death, which a person with knowledge of the events said was caused by an apparent drug overdose that led to cardiac arrest. What is clear is that one of the last people to see her alive was Mr. Hickerson, with whom she had reconnected. A heavily redacted report released on Tuesday by the police in Greenville, South Carolina, where she died, said that it was Mr. Hickerson and his brother Zach Hickerson who had called 911. When the paramedics failed to revive her, Brian Hickerson became emotional, the police said. In an apartment complex in Greenville, Mr. Hickerson, age 37, spoke with the police about Hayden, age 36, and shared with officers a bag containing her medications, though many details are redacted in the report. She had spoken openly about struggling with addiction to pharmaceutical drugs, which started when a former representative gave her as a teenage actress what she thought was an amphetamine. Mr. Hickerson has not been accused of being involved in Miss Panettiere's death. The Greenville Police Department has said a preliminary investigation did not produce evidence of foul play or suspicious circumstances, and the Greenville County Coroner's Office has said that no signs of trauma were discovered that would have contributed to the death. Mr. Hickerson, his brother, and other family members, and a lawyer who has represented him did not respond to requests for comment. The revelation that Mr. Hickerson was with Miss Panettiere in her final hours has prompted a re-examination of their turbulent relationship, which Hayden said her family and friends had tried to extricate her from for years. The person with knowledge of the event said that in March, Miss Panettiere hired private security to help ensure that Mr. Hickerson stayed away. This person in her life that we had been trying to get rid of for quite some time was with her at her death, and that was Brian Hickerson. Leslie Vogel, Miss Panettiere's mother, told NBC News on Tuesday. Ms. Vogel did not respond to requests for comment from the New York Times. In an interview with TMZ in May, Mr. Hickerson called Ms. Vogel, with whom Miss Panettiere was often estranged, one of the worst people I've ever met in my life. Court documents and Hayden's memoir, This Is Me, A Reckoning, detail instances of domestic violence by Mr. Hickerson. In one case, he was sentenced to 45 days in jail after pleading no contest to 2 felony counts of injuring Miss Panettiere. Despite recent efforts to distance herself, there were also times throughout the relationship that Miss Panettiere returned to him, walling off herself from concerned friends and family members. What I never told them was that the abuse I endured didn't feel as bad as the thought of being alone, she wrote in her memoir. In the interview with TMZ, which took place around that time that Miss Panettiere released her memoir, Mr. Hickerson said that the stories within it were true and that he had gone into a dark place that included drugs, alcohol, and abuse. Terrible thing I did to her, he said. He noted that he had spoken to her the previous day about the release of her book and described them as good buddies. I think that Hayden's one of the most talented people I've ever met in my life, he said in an interview. I would be an idiot not to walk away from her and let her flourish in her career. Miss Panettiere and Mr. Hickerson met 8 years ago at a popular West Hollywood watering hole. The relationship moved at lightning speed, she wrote in her memoir. They danced in her living room, played board games, and watched Netflix, all hidden from prying cameras and even her family members. 2 best friends living under one roof, she wrote. But then Mr. Hickerson began to abuse her. The slaps became hits, she wrote. One night, she recalled, he busts up my face so badly, I don't leave the house for weeks. In her memoir, Miss Panettiere recounted a Valentine's Day trip to Wyoming in 2020 where a night of drinking turned to violence. Once she and Mr. Hickerson returned to their rental house, she wrote that their banter grew hostile and that he pushed her into a wall and slapped her. After the police responded to a call about a disturbance, he was taken away in handcuffs and spent the night in jail. I had a lot to drink and I got physical with her, he said in the TMZ interview. According to court documents, Mr. Hickerson was also arrested in connection with an encounter in Los Angeles on May 2, 2019. Though the case file does not include a narrative of what transpired, documents identify a person or witness involved in the case as Hayden P. In her memoir, Miss Panettiere said a neighbor called 911 after a brawl with Mr. Hickerson in which he pinned her down and punched her repeatedly. Mr. Hickerson was initially charged with 7 felony counts, including assault, injuring a girlfriend, and dissuading a witness from prosecuting a crime, as well as misdemeanor battery. He eventually pleaded no contest to 2 felony counts of injuring Miss Panettiere. When Mr. Hickerson was serving his sentence, Miss Panettiere, who also struggled with alcoholism, was in a facility trying to get sober. Records show that after his release, Mr. Hickerson violated his probation in 2022 and was ordered not to drink alcohol or enter the Sunset Marquis, a hotel in West Hollywood, California. On August 1st, 2022, Mr. Hickerson was sentenced to several years of formal probation. As a part of that probation, he was required to complete a year-long domestic violence treatment program, attending Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, and complete dozens of anger management sessions, according to court records. He has said that he is part of an Alcoholics Anonymous group led by the actor Shia LaBeouf. The records also show that Mr. Hickerson has twice tried to get a judge to reduce his felony convictions to misdemeanors. During the first attempt in 2025, prosecutors told the judge there were numerous incidents of domestic violence according to the court records, and reminded the judge that Mr. Hickerson had previously been charged with trying to dissuade a witness. The second attempt occurred last week, according to court papers. A judge denied the request. The Spaghetti is Baltimore's gift to the world. How the bright red beer cocktail went from a Charm City special to a worldwide phenomenon. Baltimore has no shortage of regional specialties: pit beef, skylight snowballs, and Maryland crab, caked in Old Bay or packed into chubby cakes, all rank among its greatest contributions to the culinary world. When it comes to washing them down, though, the only choice really is the spaghetti. Sorry, that's a bottle of Miller High Life beer tinted pink with Aperol and sharpened with lemon juice. This is not to be confused with the NASCAR Spritz, made with Aperol, lemon, and Budweiser, or the century-old Radler, combining German lager and sparkling lemonade. The Spaghetti is an Aperol Spritz if you replace the Prosecco with the so-called champagne of beers, and it's about as Italian as the marinara-stained character it's named after. It was that period of time where putting a tequila in a Corona was a big deal, said Reed Cahill, a former bartender at Wet City Brewing in the Mount Vernon neighborhood of Baltimore, who in 2016 was tasked with creating beer cocktails to round out the brewery's menu of craft beers. There was the sour Gostarita and the Manly Deeds, made with IPA, but only the Spaghetti turned pink, tasted delicious, and took seconds to make. Plus, the name was unforgettable. It was a dumb idea we came up with, said Mr. Cahill, now 33. It's not like we were mapping the human genome. He's only being humble. A decade later, walk into a bar with Miller High Life behind the counter, and there's a good chance the bartender will know what to do when you order a spaghetti. They hand over the bottle for a swig, then they replace the missing beer with Aperol and lemon as juice or a slim wedge. They could pull out their tools and measure, but why bother? It's part of the beauty of it, said Lucas Fenton of Brooklyn, New York, who works as a sales representative for a beer distributor. Everybody makes it a little bit different. There's really no right way. Mr. Fenton, age 27, was in high school when the first spaghetti was poured. Now he and his friend Iggy Godley review them on their Instagram account, Spaghettis of New York City. Since 2025, they have rated nearly 100 versions of the beer-based cocktails on a 10-point scale carried to 2 decimal places. They consider the temperature of the beer, the proportion of Aperol, and whether the bartender serves it in the bottle. Price matters too. The project began after Mr. Godley paid $14 for a can of Miller High Life with a shot of Aperol. A true spaghetti, the reviewers said, should not cost more than $10. We needed a system so that it never happened again, Mr. Godley said. From 2016 to 2019, the cocktail was primarily ordered by bartenders and Wet City regulars. Occasionally, though, a visitor wandered in and requested one. One of them was Alex Delaney, then the drinks editor for Bon Appetit magazine, who had stopped by the brewery while killing time before meeting a friend. He saw the spaghetti listed as a special on the menu for $5 and couldn't resist. I drank 2 more immediately after, he said. Back in New York, he wrote an ode to the drink, calling it his favorite summer cocktail, which went on to become Bon Appetit's best-performing cocktail story that year. Soon, Mr. Delaney spotted the spaghetti at local bars and house parties. It's an everyman's drink, he said. The barrier to entry is almost non-existent. The spaghetti does not require a shaker or glassware, and the 3-ingredient drink can be made anywhere, anytime, and by anyone. It works just as much by the pool as it does in a dive bar, said Sophia Colucci, the Chief Marketing Officer for Molson Coors, the parent company of Miller High Life. No one knows how many spaghettis have been sold since the drink combines liquors from 2 companies, but Molson Coors has formally embraced the trend. The company's salesperson mentioned the spaghetti when pitching Miller High Life to new accounts. In 2025, it introduced the Spaghetti-sicle, an alcoholic popsicle inspired by the drink. The spaghetti looms large at Busty's Bar and Jukebox in Austin, Texas, currently ranked 4th in the world for on-premise Miller High Life sales, according to a company representative. Besides 7-ounce pony beers and 2 Miller High Life draft lines, he sells the lager and frozen spaghetti cocktails created by pouring the usual ingredients plus orange juice into a slushy machine. He named it the world-famous spaghetti. The world-famous part may have been debatable at one point, but these days the spaghetti has its own holiday. Every year on August 6th, the date Mr. Delaney's article was published by Bon Appetit, Wet City Brewery celebrates Spaghetti Day. This year, the owners, PJ and Josh Sullivan, gave a party sponsored by Aperol and sold nearly 30 spaghettis, roughly 6 times as many on a busy Saturday. I thought it would fade away, PJ Sullivan said. It never did. Take it from Mr. Cahill, the drink's inventor. He left Baltimore, quit the hospitality industry, and went to law school. But everywhere he went, the spaghetti followed. I even saw one in Iceland, he said. I'm going to be haunted by this drink for the rest of my life. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. U.S. will try California arson suspect again after stunning mistrial. The man accused of setting the blaze that later turned deadly in the Pacific Palisades is now readying for a new prosecution after a previous effort in June failed. Federal prosecutors are trying again to convict a 30-year-old man accused of starting one of the most destructive fires in California, history recasting the charges against him after a stunning mistrial. The effort reflects a push for accountability after the deadly 2025 Palisades fire, even after 10 of 12 jurors voted in June to find the man, Jonathan Rinderknecht, not guilty. A federal judge declared a mistrial. Prosecutors filed a new indictment on August 13th, shaving the number of arson-related felony charges against Mr. Rinderknecht from 3 to 2. One now focuses solely on the Lockman fire, which began on New Year's and which investigators say smoldered for a week before exploding to the Palisades blaze. Mr. Rinderknecht now faces felony charges of 1 count of destruction of property using fire, specifically the Lockman fire, and 1 of arson affecting property used in interstate commerce, which relates to both the Lockman and Palisades fires. An arraignment is scheduled before Wednesday in a downtown Los Angeles federal courtroom before Judge Ann Wang of the U.S. District Court for the Central District of California. Mr. Rinderknecht's retrial is set to begin October 19th. At Mr. Rinderknecht's first trial, the prosecution argued that Mr. Rinderknecht had resented the rich and started the fire with a lighter as a societal revenge. But Mr. Rinderknecht's lawyer argued that New Year's fireworks had set it off. Prosecutors said that Mr. Rinderknecht had been angry that he hadn't secured plans for the holiday, and his Uber passengers from that night testified that he ranted about capitalism. Late that night, Mr. Rinderknecht hiked up a Pacific Palisades trail near where the Lockman fire began. As the blaze grew, he called 911 more than a dozen times. Prosecutors said he was trying to cover his tracks. Mr. Rinderknecht's lawyer, Stephen Haney, said it would be self-destructive and idiotic for an arsonist to call the authorities rather than leaving immediately. Mr. Haney at the trial said that there were gaps in the government's case. The scene was left unprotected for 12 days, destroying evidence, and 9,000 or so videos compiled in the investigation. None caught the ignition, and no one identified the exact time the fire started. To Dave Ring, a Los Angeles-based civil lawyer who has no interest in the case, the revised charges represent a distinction without a difference, and prosecutors will still face steep challenges. I think their case still is going to be incredibly difficult to win, he said. Regardless of the outcome of Mr. Rinderknecht's case, the city of Los Angeles and other government agencies could still file civil liability for failures during the fire. Many residents are still displaced more than a year and a half after the fire killed 12 people and destroyed thousands of homes in the wealthy Pacific Palisades section of Los Angeles. California becomes first state to regulate the squish of car tires. The rule to require efficient replacement tires was praised by environmentalists, but manufacturers warned that the change would hurt American companies and increase tire prices. California already has strict rules on how much pollution vehicles can release through exhaust pipes, how many toxic metals that brake pads can shed onto streets, and how quickly car makers must transition to electric fleets. This week, California added another to the list: how much tires can squish as they roll along the road. California this week became the first state in the nation to set energy-efficient standards for replacement car tires, which the state says will both lower fuel consumption and cut greenhouse gas emissions. The move comes as gas prices remain high as the war with Iran continues and as the Republican-led federal government tries to undermine other fuel efficiency efforts in California. At issue is the concept of rolling resistance, a measure of how much a tire deforms from the pressure of hitting the road. The more the tire squishes, the more work it is for the car to keep the wheels turning, and the more fuel the vehicle burns. For a similar reason, it requires more energy to pedal a bicycle with half-inflated tires than one with fully inflated ones. Replacement tires typically have more rolling resistance than the tires that cars are sold with, which tends to result in fewer miles per gallon. That's because auto manufacturers often use more efficient tires on new models in order to meet vehicle emission standards. But drivers tend to be price conscious when they buy replacement tires and sacrifice efficiency for cost. The new rule, which the California Energy Commission approved on Monday, requires that replacement tires sold in the state have the same rolling resistance on average as the tires sold with new vehicles by 2033. The rule will be phased in with the first set of changes required by 2029. Currently, only about 30% of tires meet the 2033 standards, according to Nancy Skinner, a state energy commissioner. Many industry groups oppose the measure. They warn that the state will most likely not be able to enforce the rule and that foreign manufacturers could find loopholes to import cheap tires that do not meet the standards and could harm consumers. We don't feel that this regulation is ready for prime time, Tracy Norberg, Executive Vice President and General Counsel of the United States Tire Manufacturers Association, said at a commission meeting on Monday. Competitiveness is at an all-time high. Concern for this industry, where we were seeing low-cost importers that cut corners on safety and performance, importing tires into the market. California is particularly vulnerable. Industry opponents also said that under the rule, the driver of a light-duty gasoline car would spend about $26 extra for a pair of replacement tires, according to the commission. This regulation is not ready for adoption, Brett Gladfelty, a lobbyist speaking on behalf of Goodyear, said at the meeting. The sudden rush to pass this regulation as drafted will hurt consumers, drive up costs, and simply flood the state with used tires that will be only affordable west of the Mississippi. The California Energy Commission, however, said that the rule would ultimately save Californians money. By the agency's estimates, the higher upfront cost of the tires would be offset by fuel savings of $179 over the life of the tire, resulting in a net savings of $153. In total, the rule would save California drivers $1 billion per year in gasoline and electricity costs equivalent to roughly $75 per household in the state, according to the commission. It also would avert 2 million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions from entering the atmosphere each year, the agency says. Beth Hammond, Senior Electric Vehicle and Infrastructure Advocate at the Natural Resources Defense Council, called it a win for consumers, the environment, and public health. This is basically where the rubber meets the road on vehicle efficiency. The rule had been a long time coming. In 2003, the California legislature passed a law requiring the Energy Commission to reestablish tire standards. But the state paused its efforts after Congress in 2007 directed the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration to establish a nationwide tire efficiency rating system. California waited to see if a federal framework would accomplish what the state was trying to do. When that didn't happen, the Commission resurrected its independent rulemaking process in 2020. Dan Jacobson, Senior Advisor for Environment America, said that the delay had meant that California consumers had lost out on more than 2 decades of savings and suffered from air pollution and harmful climate change impacts over that period. We cannot wait another minute, Mr. Jacobson said at Monday's meeting. It's very rare that you get a rule that both is good for consumers and so good for the environment. Ms. Hammond with the NRDC said she expected the regulation to have ripple effects across the nation, with increased awareness of the issue and more low rolling resistance tires available beyond California. How one county profited from data centers amid a growing national backlash. Loudoun County, Virginia has gotten rich hosting more than 250 data centers, allowing it to cut property taxes. Other locals are taking note, even as a nationwide backlash over data centers grows. Over the past 2 years, Virginia's Loudoun County unveiled a sleek $102 million recreation center with multiple pools and hydro massage chairs. It spent $22 million to convert the estate of former President James Monroe into a park, and it opened 2 new schools with another under construction. While many communities are in a fiscal crisis, Loudoun is flush. The source of its riches, data centers. A convergence of early fiber internet access and fast-track zoning has made Loudoun the data center hubs of the world. Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and others have built or are leasing more than 250 warehouses full of computer servers that are powering artificial intelligence and the internet. At least 24 more are in the pipeline. 2 decades into its experiment, Loudoun has become a case study for the rest of the nation on how to make data centers pay off. Thanks to the proliferation of the warehouses, the quiet bedroom community 30 minutes outside Washington, D.C. has transformed into a tech destination with trophy schools and libraries and freshly tarred roads. The tax on computer equipment inside the data centers is expected to generate about $1.3 billion in revenue last year, or 40% of the county's total tax revenue. That has allowed the county to cut property taxes for residents who have the highest median income in the country by about 30% over the past decade. Officials across the nation, including in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Delaware, have sought the county's economic development staff's guidance and toured its data center alley, seeking to emulate Loudoun's success. Members of the county staff have spoken at conferences and hearings nationwide about its roadmap. But as AI's rise drives the construction of data centers across the country, residents in Loudoun have started pushing back, mirroring a growing national backlash. Officials and residents say the county has become too dependent on the cash inflow. It's gone way too far, said Julie Briskman, a member of the Board of Supervisors in charge of the county's land, zoning, and economic policies, who proposed a moratorium on data centers in July. We've become addicted to the data centers for their tax revenues, but at what cost? Other residents and county leaders maintain that data centers have been a gold mine that has made Loudoun one of the best places to live. I call this the great overreaction, said Buddy Reiser, Executive Director for Economic Development in Loudoun, adding that data centers occupied just 3% of the land. Loudoun's success monetizing data centers runs counter to a nationwide trend in which communities court the computing sites with huge tax incentives, then experience buyer's remorse as the centers guzzle water and electricity. Data centers typically create few jobs and little revenue for a community. Last month, New York paused data center development for 1 year after an attempt by lawmakers to do so in Maine. In Virginia, state lawmakers recently passed a small tax on data centers based on how much energy they consume. Even before the data center boom, Loudoun was an internet hub. In the early 1990s, the federal government installed fiber internet lines here, making it a magnet for tech companies. AOL made Ashburn in Loudoun its headquarters in 1996. 4 years later, a zoning official made the pivotal decision to categorize data centers as office parks, which require few regulatory approvals for development and construction that help fuel a building bonanza. By 2007, the county had 29 data centers. That same year, the county's Board of Supervisors hired Mr. Reiser to market Loudoun to tech companies as part of an economic plan to attract more data centers. At the time, sales tax revenue on computer equipment in data centers categorized as a business personal property tax was nominal. Mr. Reiser's successful bid to attract more tech companies fueled a spike in income that reached $1.1 billion last year, up from $150 million a decade earlier. The windfall allowed the Board of Supervisors to reduce residential property taxes every year for the past decade to some of the lowest in the country. The board used the funds to increase budgets for schools, expand fire and emergency services, and improve roads, bridges, and tolls. People understood that the data centers were the reason we were building schools and keeping taxes low, and those kinds of things, Mr. Reiser said, adding that the centers have generated about 15,000 jobs. From the day we started with data centers to today, more than half of the people are new, so they don't remember when we were struggling financially. He said he had gotten frequent calls from economic development offices around the nation wanting to replicate Loudoun's success. We struck the right balance and we are a model, he said, with a larger budget, $5.5 billion this year, and strong credit that has allowed the county to float big bond projects. Loudoun expanded recreational services. Last year it opened a 117,000 square foot exercise and community gathering space. On a recent Monday morning, the Ashburn Recreation and Community Center bustled with older people at one end of the competition-sized pool, waving their arms in a water aerobics class, and children playing in a separate splash pool with slides and sprinklers. Loudoun is special, said Sana Akbar, age 39, a resident for nearly 3 decades and a frequent user of the recreation center. Her son's school recently installed a new playground. Yet there are many data centers, and some people say too many, but they've brought many benefits, she added. The public projects create jobs, said David Costello, head of Costello Construction in Columbia, Maryland. He said of the 250 employees on the Ashburn Recreation Center project, 40% were Loudoun residents. They keep building. It's a perpetual thing, Mr. Costello said. But with 53 million square feet of data centers, the equivalent of 920 football fields of space, land and patience for more of the warehouses are running out. When Greg Pirro, age 75, bought his home in Sterling in Loudoun County 14 years ago, he said his neighborhood was full of trees and birds. But in 2023, the data center company Vantage began construction nearby, transforming the neighborhood. Now, 2 gray and blue data centers create noise and pollution about 200 yards from his town home. He and other neighbors have complained about the diesel generators and gas turbines used to power the facility. What is the quality of life for those who don't even want to go outside because of the noise, he said. A Vantage spokesman said it had built the power plants because the local utility, Dominion Energy, would not give access to the grid, which was promised before construction began. Dominion disputed that claim. Vantage said it had put up more paneling and noise-dampening technology to reduce noise from the turbines. Vicki Hugh, a resident of nearby Ashburn, moved to her spacious home with her mother, husband, and a daughter in 2005. A greenbelt area of protected forest behind her home, which leads down to a creek, made it a place to retire. Dominion Energy recently told Miss Hugh, age 59, that it planned to put a 185-foot high-voltage electricity tower in her backyard to power new data centers. There are no boundaries, Miss Hugh, a real estate agent, said. A Dominion Energy spokesman said it was following orders by the state utilities regulator to serve the rising power needs of residents, public services, and businesses, including data centers. Some residents and environmental groups have demanded policy changes that would make it harder for data centers to open, and the county has made some major changes in response. Last year, the Board of Supervisors voted to drastically slow data center construction by ending the zoning policy that considered them office buildings. The decision will not end development, but it will require data center projects, for the first time in decades, to seek approvals from the public and the board. Last month, Amazon applied to build 4 data centers, which some board members say they would reject. Hossein Fatah, the founder of Cloud HQ, a data center maker and operator that has 15 data centers completed or under construction in Loudoun, is frustrated that the county has been caught in a national political debate. If you want to access Netflix, go on Instagram, make sure your email is working, or your Uber Eats or Google Maps operates. You can because of data centers, he said. In July, about 100 residents, data center employees, and others attended a contentious town hall meeting to discuss data centers. Some wore light blue t-shirts that said, "I support data centers because I like lower taxes, excellent schools, better job opportunities, and more." Bill Hunda said his company's civil engineering, landscaping, and surveying firm had grown because of data centers. Even when federal jobs were cut last year, which affected some of his business, the data center business covered any potential shortfalls in revenue, he said. Other residents said tech companies had become so aggressive they were being pushed out. In a luxury residential community called the Regency, a company is trying to buy over 100 homes for more than $4 million each, said Vital Gandhi, age 47, a resident and father of two. That's more than double the value of the houses. At the end of the day, the data centers aren't going anywhere, so why not create incentives for residents, he asked, adding that he is trying to persuade neighbors to sell. Make it a win-win. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Ukraine's ex-defense minister calls for elections, cementing break with Zelensky. Mikhailo Fedorov, a popular young leader who was fired last month, said Russia should not be allowed to dictate when Ukrainians can choose their next government. Ukraine's popular former defense minister has called for wartime elections in Ukraine, setting up potential confrontation with President Vladimir Zelensky, the man who fired him last month. After Russia invaded in February 2022, elections in Ukraine were suspended under martial law. Opposing political parties and some Ukrainians have grumbled under Mr. Zelensky's hold on power, which has extended for more than 7 years, but rallied behind him because of the war. The first major crack in that largely unified front appeared on Tuesday evening when the former defense minister, Mikhailo Fedorov, whose firing prompted sustained protests against Mr. Zelensky, posted a 9-minute video on social media. In it, Mr. Fedorov argued that Ukraine was facing a systemic crisis of governance. Ukrainians, Mr. Fedorov said, need to be able to exercise their democratic rights despite the war with Russia. He did not directly put himself forward as a candidate to succeed Mr. Zelensky, but the video of Mr. Fedorov dressed in a black military-style shirt, dramatically spotlighted at a wooden desk, had the feel of a campaign declaration. Can Russia effectively be given the right to dictate when Ukrainians can choose their government again, Mr. Fedorov said. I am convinced that the answer is no. Democracy cannot be held hostage by Russia. We are fighting precisely because we want to remain a free European state. Mr. Zelensky, a one-time comic actor who rose to prominence playing an accidental president of Ukraine who fought corruption and government waste, was elected in the spring of 2019. He and other Ukrainian leaders have argued that it is impossible to hold safe and fair wartime elections. The law could be changed to allow elections before the war ends, but it is unclear how voting would be conducted for soldiers, for Ukrainians who fled to other countries, and for those who are in frontline cities under constant Russian bombardment. President Vladimir V. Putin of Russia has seized on the lack of elections to call Mr. Zelensky an illegitimate president, even as Russia itself remains far from a democratic paragon. President Trump and his inner circle have occasionally echoed the Prussian talking point. In December, Mr. Trump said it was time for presidential elections in Ukraine, and in response, Mr. Zelensky said he was ready. Despite rumors of elections this year, nothing has materialized. Any pressure from the Trump administration has dwindled as Washington has become consumed by the war against Iran. Mr. Zelensky has been free to politically neutralize any potential challengers. The popular leaders of the Ukrainian army during the first 2 years of the war, General Valery Zaluzhny, was practically banished, becoming the Ukrainian ambassador to Britain. The popular leader of military intelligence, Kyrylo Budanov, was named Mr. Zelensky's chief of staff. Mr. Fedorov is different. He had not been afraid to criticize Mr. Zelensky publicly after his removal last month. At 35, Mr. Fedorov is the face of a younger tech-savvy generation. As Minister of Digital Transformation, he tried to make it easier for soldiers to purchase the drones they needed and to adapt military strategies based on the troves of data produced in the war. In January, Mr. Fedorov was named defense minister. Under his leadership, the ministry intensified a push for machine-led warfare and for an approach to war that relied more on data and statistics. In the first few months of the year, Ukraine's military started to fare better than it had in years. Even as Mr. Fedorov's popularity soared, he clashed with the military's occasionally sclerotic old guard, including the Army's top commander, General Oleksandr Syrskyi. Mr. Fedorov also drew intense pushback from Ukraine's entrenched defense contractors, he said, as he tried to revamp procurement and to combat corruption. Mr. Zelensky, continuing a pattern of sidelining anyone who becomes too politically popular, fired Mr. Fedorov on July 15th. Daily protests against Mr. Zelensky then began, calling for Mr. Fedorov's reinstatement and for the firing of General Syrskyi. Unlike other potential rivals who had lost their positions but stayed in the Zelensky fold, Mr. Fedorov refused any other job offer. The only position he would accept, he said, was defense minister. Mr. Zelensky eventually replaced General Syrskyi by seemingly weathered the crisis, and Parliament was on recess. The protests grew smaller. Still on Sunday evening, before the Ukrainian Parliament was to return, and 1 month after Mr. Fedorov's ouster, thousands attended a demonstration. They sang Ukrainian songs and shouted slogans including "The people are the power," "Corruption kills," and simply Fedorov. On Tuesday evening, Mr. Zelensky submitted a proposal to Parliament to appoint Yevgeny Kamara, who had run the Domestic Intelligence Agency, as the new defense minister. Mr. Fedorov then posted his video. Parliament on Wednesday voted overwhelmingly to confirm Mr. Kamara. Because the Ukrainian defense minister is supposed to be a civilian, Mr. Kamara resigned from the military. Outside Parliament, Mr. Fedorov's backers protested the vote. Hours before the vote, anti-corruption agencies announced an investigation into a group of lawmakers and high-ranking officials from Mr. Zelensky's office, the latest accusation of graft against his inner circle. Welcome to Needle Nation. Weight loss drugs, peptides, IVF as sharps migrate out of doctors' offices. Even needle phobics are willing to embrace shots. Cons Preddy developed a fear of needles as a child when a technician trying to draw her blood had to prick her repeatedly to find a good vein. "I was screaming," Miss Preddy, a magazine editor in Maine, recalled. "My mom was about to pass out." The intense fear followed into her adulthood, she said, and yet for the last 8 months, every Thursday evening, Miss Preddy, age 43, has sat down at home, swabbed her lower belly with an alcohol pad, and injected herself with a needle. The substance inside is NAD+, short for nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, a popular anti-aging supplement that Miss Preddy started taking in hopes it could help her recover after a hysterectomy. "I'm completely surprised that I'm doing this," Miss Preddy said. Needle phobes like Miss Preddy have begun to embrace injections as the syringe and the auto-injector have bursted out of the doctor's offices and into wellness clinics and bathroom vanities across the country. At-home injections, long the domain of people with diabetes, are now far more commonplace. Nearly 1 in 5 U.S. adults has tried an injectable GLP-1 drug like Ozempic. Interest in peptides and other injectable supplements is booming. The number of IVF cycles done annually in the United States, a majority of which involve at-home injections, has increased by nearly 40% since 2018. Botox, too, is increasingly popular. Almost 10 million patients received a cosmetic injectable in 2024, and IV hydration bars have gone from hangover novelty to strip mall fixtures, with hundreds of new infusion clinics cropping up nationwide. The effects of that shift have started appearing in surprising places. In New York City, more sanitation workers are getting pricked picking up garbage bags, for example. There were 46 such injuries last year, nearly double the number in 2019, according to the city's sanitation department, and there have already been nearly as many in the first 6 months of this year alone. There's times we'll open up a bag and there'll be a bunch of needles just exposed, said Christopher Traverso, a department supervisor. This June, a sign in a Nordstrom Rack restroom appeared to plead with customers to stop dropping their GLP syringes into the Sharps container. The store had to pay each time it needed to be emptied. Online, users post tips about which angle hurts the least for an injection or how to prevent air bubbles in syringes, and post videos of themselves doing DIY injections. This month, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York made headlines when she posted an Instagram video injecting herself with the drug used in the process of freezing her eggs. We've moved into this kind of DIY cultural movement where people trust inventions that they do themselves, said Jennifer Reich, sociologist at the University of Colorado, Denver, who studies how Americans manage health at home. It's not that people are necessarily any less afraid of needles. A fear that some experts have theorized is partly an evolutionary aversion to anything puncturing the skin, our body's first line of defense. In 2022, a study of 2,000 people, some of most recent data available, over 60% of people reported some level of needle phobia. Needle fear has not gone away. Merjika Babiara, a home health care nurse in New York, said, I still have patients who cringe or turn pale when they see a needle, but she and other nurses and physicians said they were seeing more patients willing to stomach a shot or infusion. One of the biggest drivers of that shift seems to be how well many of these treatments work at helping people lose weight or manage chronic diseases. The reason for taking the medication has simply become more powerful than the fear. It's a little bit of that no pain, no gain thing, added Elise Sobo, a sociocultural anthropologist specializing in health at San Diego State University. When injectable weight loss drugs first became available, there was still a lot of fear and anxiety about the delivery method, said Dr. Scott Isaacs, an endocrinologist in Cumming, Georgia. But within months, he said, all I heard was, give me the injection. He added, once people said that the injection can provide a meaningful benefit, the needle becomes much less important. Mary Beth Foster, age 45, a college essay coach in Mint Hill, North Carolina, has had a long-time fear of needles. She gave birth without an epidural, in part because she could not fathom having that needle in my spine. When she decided to start taking Zepbound for weight loss, she made her husband administer the first shot. Eventually, she started doing the injections herself. The shot was so quick that she didn't feel a thing. The fact that she didn't have to look at the needle tucked into an auto-injector pen also helped. And the benefits, Miss Foster has lost 60 pounds on Zepbound, which she called life-changing, have made it worth bearing her needle aversion. Still, Miss Foster finds herself hesitating before injecting herself. Each time she thinks, am I going to press the button? Am I going to do this? You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the August 19th issue of the New York Times. Your reader has been Claudia, and I thank you for listening.